short video games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I am joined this week by two fantastic co-hosts.
Laura Nash.
Nate Heininger.
And this week we are talking about Dredge, the fishing game, ? From Black Salt Games.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we picked this game up. I don't think you have to go very far in any sort of indie game coverage right now to see some discourse around Dredge. And I've always loved fishing mechanics in games. It's like any self-respecting game has a fishing mini game at least in it, you know.
Any self-respecting game.
It's like how I feel like any self-respecting sitcom has a musical episode. I think any self-respecting video game has a fishing element to it. So
There's a
any
part
fish-
of this in Psychonauts 2, the documentary, where at some point there was a fishing game in Psychonauts 2, and then they're like, why is there a fishing game? Like, why did we do this?
because
They're
it's
like-
good. It's
they're like-
fun.
They're like, why is Raz fishing?
Why isn't Raz fishing?
It's
is
one of the best
question.
parts of the documentary where they're talking about game bloat. They're like, Raz is fishing at some point. Why?
Yes, the question with most games isn't why doesn't this have a fishing mechanic? It's why did you cut the fishing mechanic?
Yeah. So I have an affinity, I think, like a lot of people, for fishing games and fishing mechanics, and I'm not a huge horror fan. We cover the games for the shows, or we cover games like that for the show. Sometimes we try to line it up with Halloween, but here we are.
We're terrible at it.
Yeah, once again, we're 2 months ahead of time for a horror game. But of course,
I guess 2 months, yeah. End of
Yeah,
October, right.
yeah, it's it's big in the discourse. So horror, interesting. I think horror and the sea is an obvious combination, right? Like the ocean is inherently scary. So when you hear about, like, oh, it's a fishing game that has a horror element to it, like, that seems like a perfect combination. So I was really intrigued to get a chance to play this game.
Yeah, it was a really intriguing combination, and a lot of folks from our Discord chimed in to tell us that they had played this or wanted us to play it, or suggested this game to us. So many thanks to everyone who suggested
Yes.
it. We've all had sort of slightly different responses to it. So this is going to be, I'd say, probably a little bit of a mixed episode as these things go for us. But it was it's definitely an interesting play, and I'm glad we got a chance to check it out because it was so. It was we're a little behind the wave on this one, but a lot of people were talking about this the last
Both
the couple of weeks after. Yes, a couple of weeks after it came out. So I'm glad to sort of see what the fuss was about.
Yeah, and on that, part of the reason why we're a little bit behind the wave, not just because our show, we have our own scheduling and our own scheduling complications, but this is a slightly longer game than we cover a lot of times on the show.
Open world.
Yeah, and I did beat it, and I've spent a fair amount of time on this. I'm horrible at keeping track of my own game times. Every game that I play on Steam ends up saying like 89 hours because I just I just leave it while
Pause
I'm
and
doing
wander
it.
off.
Yeah, every
You
time
do have children.
well, yeah, it's that would be an easy cop out. It's not that. I just have a bunch of bad habits, and every time I'm like, this is the game that I'm gonna really try to keep track of my hours, but I did not again. But I probably spent 10 to 14 hours. It's kind of hard for me to tell. But I really tried to play through this game. I think I probably enjoyed it the most of this group, although I have some, I think there's some interesting things to talk about where the game didn't perfectly click for me, but I really wanted to beat it and play it all the way through, and I did. But part of the reason I think it took us a while to get this episode together is just that is longer for us.
This one's almost hard to cover because there's so many different bits and elements. It's a pretty crunchy fishing game. There's a lot of mechanics. To steal a phrase from the press kit, there is a sinister undercurrent that we could be talking about for a while. Lots of fishing puns in the press materials, but it is atmospheric, but also it's like, what if there's a cozy fishing sim, but then Cthulhu environment type things. Like it's Lovecraftian. It's got a lot of things in the mix, which I normally try to make a little outline for myself, and it's one of the most chaotic notes. It's like message in a bottle, puzzle fishing inventory,
Yeah.
collector question mark. These notes make no sense. So we'll do our
It's
best, dear listeners, but it's a bit of a complicated game in a funny way to me.
And Nate mentioned a little bit that this was a bit mixed for us. Just cards on the table, since Nate said how long he played it. I bounced off this game pretty early. Like I played for about 2 hours, and by that point, I was pretty sure I wasn't into it. But I kept going. I played a total of about 4 hours, and that's sort of where I decided to drop this game. So we'll talk a little bit about how we sort of had different experiences with it. We're also probably going to talk about some spoiler stuff towards the end, which I'm not spoiled on. I don't know much about the ending. I probably won't go and dive into it, but Nate and Laura have both played more than me, so I'm eager to hear maybe what I missed and see if maybe that would have made me feel differently about it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this one.
Yeah, Nate took more of the completionist role in this one, where I was going for like completing the story so I could talk about it. So I think I took the quote unquote faster path on this one. Um, Played
yeah.
longer, like, but I'm definitely in the middle on length and investment,
Yeah,
whereas
and How
Nate.
Long to Beat says 9 hours on this, which I think is
Mhm.
undercutting it. That they very often, the numbers there are very often like lower than I would usually expect. But yeah, probably expect this to be a minimum of a 10-hour game for almost any play style.
Yeah.
Yeah. Laura, you were talking about the complexity of the game and just the variety of elements. And I do think that's something that is sort of a mark in favor of this game, but it is an interesting element because this game is like, to use another bit of ocean pun, it's like a mile wide, but like an inch deep, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. There's a ton of stuff in this game. But
Has the UI of like a 60-hour game, and I don't play
yeah,
many of those, and so I was like a little babe in the woods like, "Oh no, there's a lot of buttons on the screen."
yeah, but nothing is ever that particularly involved,
And
like
you can ignore most of it.
yeah, and like Reagan, your 4 hours experience, there is not a significant change between the first 4 hours of the game and the last 5 hours of the game or so.
Yeah,
It does get to some degree more complicated, but for the most part, the gameplay loop is pretty static. And so I think you'll know if you haven't checked this game out and you're trying to play along with the show or like you're not sure how much farther you want to go into the episode, like I think it's worth trying and I think you'll know pretty quick whether you enjoy this game or not. That said, for me, I didn't really enjoy it until I got the engine upgrades, which I highly recommend.
yeah,
So
that was a good tip that you offered me, by the way, Nate. That did help. It didn't
the
totally
boat
change
is
the
so
experience for me,
slow.
but God, the boat is so slow
It's
at the
so
beginning of the game.
Mhm.
It's
slow.
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's so
There were
slow.
some This is a very atmospheric game, but the boat goes real slow, so I will confess I listened to some podcasts while fishing, which
Mhm.
completely destroys the atmosphere.
Yeah, I
So I
that's
turned them off out of guilt.
so far from what they want you to be doing while this
Yeah,
playing this
I
game. But
stopped because I was like, "Ugh, this is
Laura,
bad for the listeners."
I
So
did the same though once I got like when you get really like you're doing a lot of fishing, and we'll talk about the mechanics of it later. But like despite this game being a horror game, it's not very scary for the vast majority of it. So
Mhm.
like you are just sort of tootling around in this world,
tootling.
looking for fish, and then something scary kind of happens, maybe depending on how you're managing yourself, and you have to get back to the dock. So I found myself having some external engagement going,
Stimulation.
yeah, stimulation as well, which I would actually say is like that's what I would expect from a fishing game, right? Like there are
Mhm.
certain
Yeah.
games that are more geared towards that. We've talked about like one of my favorite things, one of my ways of relaxing is playing a game and listening to a podcast. Like there are certain games for me where that is like a perfect balance that I really really enjoy. And this game dipped into that from time to time, but it was not perfect for it. So I ended up pausing my podcast and doing the engaging thing. Anyway, point being, like it is not it's not fully stimulating all the time, and I'm not surprised that you were at least trying to listen to headphones and other stuff while you're playing.
Let's talk about
So
the mechanics here because I feel like it's important to understand like what does it mean to fish in this game and what else are you doing? Because fishing is so simple that it's like
yeah.
it there needs to be more to it.
I mean,
I'll just
real
go ahead.
quick,
Sorry.
have y'all played actual like fishing sims like Bassmaster or any of
Mhm.
the like the complicated ones with the
It's
It's
been
rods
been
a
a
and the
long
while.
time. Yeah, I
Yeah.
played the one on Dreamcast, Sega Bass Fishing,
Mhm.
and it's been a long time since I played it, but weird timing. They had that for free. Like there was some kind of thing where if you signed up for Sega's mailing list, they would send you a Steam code for Sega Bass Fishing recently, and I just got it, and it's sitting there on my Steam Deck, and I'm like,
Nice.
I was like trying to, sitting down to play Dredge, and I was like, well, I could play Dredge, or I could play Sega Bass Fishing, but I did
Yeah.
not. I've not booted it up yet. So
This is not that. It's not a first
No.
person fancy which lure you got to use type experience. That's not what this is.
Yeah.
no.
No, the game has a pretty consistent gameplay loop. So you start out, it has this horror theming around the whole thing. So you start out as this man who's crashed a ship against a rocky outcropping of a small town called there's Greater
Yeah, Greater
Marrow,
Marrow. Yeah.
Mhm.
which is a pretty good name for a spooky town. Marrow as a town, that's pretty good.
Mhm.
Mm.
And right across the bay is Little Marrow. And you meet the town mayor, and pretty quickly you're given a boat. You're also given some debt to the city, which I thought was a funny mechanic. I don't.
Taxes.
Yeah, I thought they
This
would
guy's
play
like
more with it, but
spooky Tom Nook.
I think it was to really force you to stay in the starting area. It's the only reason I can think of why they did the like you have to pay your taxes, because that never comes back. I don't know if that's a
Mhm.
spoiler, but it never comes back. But you're bound to this town where you are expected to go out and fish, and you return with your fish and sell them. And in this small town, there's a couple things. There's the fishmonger who you can sell your fish to. There's a shipwright where you can upgrade your ship, and then there's a dry dock, or the fishwright. Sorry, the shipwright can upgrade stuff like your lures or your reels and your nets and your fishing equipment and your engines. And then there's the dry dock that actually upgrades like the full structure of your boat, making your boat bigger and whatnot. And you also start to understand that maybe things are not as they seem around here. There's a spooky
Ooh.
lighthouse lady who, has all sorts of spooky things to say. And you're warned constantly, do not be out at night. Don't go out in the water at night, because bad things happen when you're out at night. And so you're in a fully 3D world driving your little boat. You never get out of your boat. You are 100% the entire game. You are a boat. You
You
don't
are
even
boat.
You are the boat.
you are a boat. You do see your player character through like little, like little, not cut scenes, but like, dialogue scenes where like one half is you and the other half is the person you're talking to. But for all intents and purposes, during this game, you play as a boat. And
That's the true horror. You have
yeah, right.
become a boat.
And so you have access to, you're in this small little cove, and the cove is surrounded by rocks and other things that you can run into, which I did a million fucking
So
times.
much.
Mhm.
And you see these little like little pools, little things of little jumping fish, little bubbles, and depending on the type of fish, they might look a little bit different, but it's pretty obvious when you see it. And you tootle your little boat over top of it, and you enter into the fishing mini game. Which, Reagan, this is where I was surprised that you didn't like the fishing as much, because to me this was golf game mechanics. Like,
I
Mhm.
if
see
you
what you mean. Yeah, it definitely has that like swing meter of like a golf game. I
yeah
don't know, man. For me, the golf game is about like doing that thing and then watching it fly, not
yeah
doing that thing
that's
and then
fair.
playing the Resident Evil inventory mechanic puzzle to slot your fish
Oh, I
into a
was thinking of
square.
it like Professor Layton, like the suitcase games.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. But
Yeah, it is.
this is like it reads as Resident Evil suitcase to me. Like it's
Mhm.
Mhm.
put
Yeah,
put
same, Reagan.
your bullets next to your gun and see if you can slot them together so you have enough space for your, flares or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is
so
like in real fish, you just throw it in an ice chest and they all stack on top of each other. So it's
yeah, it's
like
just
Yeah.
it's
not
full or it's
accurate.
not. There's not but yeah,
Fish
so
are
so
fish historically very concretely shaped and not floppy or flexible at
The
all.
horror of cuboid fish. It's
yeah.
really
Yeah, there's a
they
lot of other horrors going on in this game just from the game design. But yeah, so what's interesting, like the fishing mechanic though, you don't actually even have to participate in it if you don't want to. So you are you have a you drop your line and you see a little silhouette of what type of fish is going to be in here. And on the left hand side, you see like a little cartoon fish being reeled in. And you have some version of that like swing meter game where like, you know, it might be a full circle and there's a white dash going around the circle and there are green spots in the circle. And if you hit X when the dash lines up with the green spot, you reel in faster. And if you
Mhm.
fail, like the fish drops down a little bit more. And so all you're doing with these little mini games is catching fish faster. You could actually, if you wanted to, just not do it at all and you will reel in that fish, but it obviously is considerably slower. So you are encouraged to participate in the fishing mini game. And the reason you're encouraged to do that is that it behooves you to catch fish as fast as possible so that you can bring them in and get back to a safe place before night falls. And that is there's a lot of little parts of this that we're going to like talk about as the game opens up and expands, but the core of this game is taking your little boat out, finding a fish spot or a dredge spot we'll talk about, catching as many fish as you can or trying to catch a very specific type of fish and then bringing it back to the town in order to sell it, to repair your boat, to fix up your boat, and to improve your boat. Like the majority of the gameplay of this game is a upgrade your boat so that you can continue to upgrade your boat sort of thing. And
Mhm.
personally, I really enjoyed it. Like I enjoy looking for the different fish and upgrading the boat. You know, getting like, oh, this engine is 10 knots per second faster than that other one. Like I want that. I want to get that. I want to be able to reel in faster. I want to get more cargo space. Like I enjoyed like that core gameplay of the game. Laura, what did you think of it?
I was somewhere in between where I mean, this is a nice repetitive action that's like enough challenging that you're like you need to engage, you need to like
Yeah.
think a little bit to do it. Like that's a really sweet spot. I think I was really happy with fishing for like 4 to 5 hours and then I was like, okay.
Hmm.
Like let me buy some crab pots. I need some
Yeah.
which are ways to get fish without the mini game. I was like I need to keep making money, but I also need to like was like, "Oh no, I'm the furthest along in the game. I need to finish this game. Like
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
need to move it. The boat's going too slow and the fish are like a little slow." So I I'm saying this because I do think that the impatience probably colored the perception of the game. I then took a break for a couple days. Um thank you Labor Day and then played and was like, "Okay, no, I just needed to chill." Like I you don't
Hmm.
I had to fish for money before and it was a job in the game. Like I was treating it like a job. When I
Yeah.
made it more like a passive thing I was doing in addition to the rest of the game, it was a much better thing. I think the game is at times you need a lot of money or you need a lot of fish or you need a
Hmm.
specific fish. And those were the times I got frustrated with the fishing mechanic when I needed to fish. When fishing was just a thing that I was able to do as part of the game, it was fine. I think I
Yeah.
burned myself out on fishing. And there are games that mechanic that happens. Like there's just not anything else you can do really
Yeah.
other than fish. So it's not
It,
like I could
yeah.
go mine ore or chop down trees. Like fishing was the only thing I could do.
Yeah.
Um, and so just if you find it and you like it, just know like max minning this game is not fun.
Yeah. I think my my response here is kind of also linked to the upgrades, because a lot of the reason that you're doing so much fishing and also dredging, which we'll talk about in a second, I guess, but it's really basically the same as fishing. It's a very similar mechanic, and you're just using the same kind of mechanic to go out and haul up junk from wrecked ships,
Mhm.
which you then bring back and use as materials to do upgrades. Um, I think maybe my like all that stuff worked okay. Like similar to Laura, I think I probably got tired of the fishing after a while. My big issue with it was that you're doing this all to be on sort of an upgrade treadmill, upgrade your boat to upgrade your boat, and
Mhm.
none of the upgrades felt that meaningful to me. Even some of the you do a lot of work, get a lot of scrap and a lot of money to upgrade your engine, and it looks very different, but it wasn't a massive increase in speed. Most of the upgrades that I got to, maybe the later game upgrades are more impactful, but most of the upgrades that I was able to get to, I upgraded my engine, I think, at least twice, and I did a couple of upgrades to the fishing gear, and all of it felt really incremental. Um, and I think, for good reason. Probably they don't want you to turn this thing into a speedboat. That would cut
Hmm.
down on a lot of the tension in the game. So I guess it's a little bit of the design problem there of like, how do you have impactful upgrades in a game where ultimately you're not supposed to feel more powerful than the creepy environmental threats that make this a horror game.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, by the end, my boat was pretty fast, but you were also like, I do think by the end the game was also the least scary it was, So
Mhm.
Yeah.
I do think that like the first quarter of the game is the scariest, and that is when you are the slowest, because by the end you're pretty fast, but you're also traveling like much greater distances, and you have all these different powers and things that make you even faster and more powerful. So
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
I do think they that you start really slow because they probably know like there's only so long you're going to be afraid in this little boat.
Well, I
Mhm.
think that vulnerability was one of the things I really enjoyed about the beginning of the game and why I had more problems in the mid game because I was
Mm.
powerful enough to mostly avoid risk unless I was consciously taking it. And I think the pacing of I had trouble knowing where I was in the storyline at that point too. Like I didn't know
Yeah.
how far I was, so I didn't have the anticipation. This was all like this picked up as I mentioned, but there is a lull in the mid game for me. There was, and that
Yeah.
might just have been that um, I wasn't moving towards some of the quests, the fetch quests that move the
Hmm.
plot forward. I
Yeah.
wasn't moving them forward at the pace I needed to.
Mhm.
So, but that in a game that's so much atmospheric, like you don't want to feel like I became aware of the mechanics in the mid game more than I like.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the atmosphere was really good at the beginning.
I want to talk about the atmosphere and how that all works here in a minute.
Mhm.
Before we get to that, though, I think it's important to probably explain the sort of fetch quest of it all and the
Mhm.
broader thing that ties this all together.
Mhm.
So, the core gameplay loop we've already talked about. Almost no matter what, you're going out, you're catching stuff, and you're bringing it back to a dock. But what you're catching and why you're catching it will change, and that is because uh, really quickly in the game you are guided to this little island where this weird old man is there, and he asks you to collect 5 relics. And why you're getting those 5 relics, you don't really know. It's
Such a
all
weird man.
masked. Yeah, it's all masked in eldritch horror, but you need to get these 5 relics. It's like a music box, a ring, a big key, like classic. I don't know. This game is set in like the 1920s or
Mhm.
1930s, late 20s.
1927 I think is the only date I remember.
There's those. That's where the another thing. The message in the bottles are set in that
Yeah.
time. I can't quite. I'm sure it says at some point the time in between those bottles and when you're playing, but
Yeah,
there
that's a date you're given and it's sometime after
at sometime after
1927.
1927. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so you're given this collector wants you to go and find these 5 lost relics for some purpose. And so in order to find those 5 relics, you're given guidance to go to these 5 distinct areas on the map. You have access to a full like, world map right out of the gates, and you can see that they're basically 5 groupings of islands, all with some distance in between them, and maybe little islands in between, but for the most part, it's like open ocean and 5 groups of islands. And you are through the game, you're guided to go to each of these sets of islands. When you get there, you inevitably meet whatever inhabitants there are of those islands, and they have a series of quests for you that will ultimately either lead to them directly getting you the relic or you indirectly get the relic. And all of those quests are some version of go catch me these fish,
Mhm.
or go find me these items that have been lost and you need to dredge them. But it's the same mechanic. Whether you're helping like 2 brothers who have lost connection find an old ring, or you're
Find
helping
my
like a
family crest, it fell in the
yeah, find
water.
yeah, or you're helping like a researcher like turn on an old laboratory or whatever. At the end of the day, it's all just
Mhm.
you got to find these fish and you got to turn them into the quest giver and they'll move the story forward. And it's okay. It serves the purpose of getting you around the world, and it requiring you to engage in the core mechanic of the game. But this is part of the game that I thought was like it was a little lacking. Like I never it's ultimately like 5 totally distinct little worlds you're going into. None of them are connected really. You have no understanding. Like they don't know what you're trying to do. They're not talking to anyone from any of the other islands. It's just like tiny little fetch quests, little fish fetch quests that you accomplish in order to move to the next world. And while I actually really enjoyed the environment of these different islands, which we'll talk about when we get to that, talking about like the environment and the spookiness of it, the actual questing is like, I wish there was more, because all it does is every quest either rewards you money or like research parts, but there's nothing really else. So everything you're doing, all of the side quests, all of it is just either money or research parts. And it kind of makes it like not super satisfying to engage in most of the side stuff.
It's like reading an episodic sci-fi or fantasy series where every new book is like, the main character's in China, the main character's in India. This time
Yeah.
we're going to South America, but it's a different type of environment. And that, like, the novelty, like, some of the environments are quite beautiful and I really enjoyed
Hmm.
being there, but um the mechanic is going to hold firm. So again, like when you're like, "Oh man, I'm so tired of fishing. I'm going to further the plot by fishing."
It's always like, go and find me, so it's some version of there are 4 fish types in this world that you can
Mhm.
catch. Some of them require daytime fishing, some of them require nighttime fishing, some of them require certain types of reels, although none of it is particularly complicated. It'll be like, this is a coastal fish that you catch during the day. Go find it. And you're like, okay, well, that's like, it's pretty limited. You ultimately do this like probably 40 times, and because this game is only 9 hours or so, you can tell that like none of these are particularly complicated, right? it's
Mhm.
it's pretty obvious generally where you're going to get the fish, and it's not too terribly difficult to go and get them.
And
I
it's
mean,
also probably worth talking a little bit about what the quest givers are like and the story framing of these. When you're going and visiting these people, like you guys can talk more about the later game ones, but ultimately, like these are characters are mostly pretty two dimensional, and I'm not just talking about the character portraits. These are they're not voiced. They are usually a single static image of a character, and the characters have like a single quirk about them. Like uh, a weird mayor, a weird lighthouse keeper, a motherless child, a builder who seems to want to build something in the middle of nowhere for no apparent reason, the collector, people like that. They have their sort of like one dimensional little character thing. Um, and they all kind of seem like they're part of this world, but like I don't know how you describe this sort of world vibe where like everyone is like a little bit insane and living in their own head and not really connected with anybody else, is the kind of
Yeah,
world vibe I get from most of the
I
NPCs.
think it's going for that eldritch horror thing where
Yeah.
like even the most sane person in this world has some sort of twisted thing going on in their life. There's
Mhm.
something eating away at their sanity, and everybody is is like one day away from just filling their filling their pockets with rocks and just walking into the ocean, you know.
Mm.
Really doesn't make you want to take a beach vacation for sure.
No, it's not a it's like there are not very many happy people in this world. The traveling merchant who is I thought was funny. There's like a pontoon dock that is at all of them. It's this exact same person, which I can't tell is just for uh like convenience sake, or if it's for like, is it like part of the dark story somehow this person's everywhere? If it's the latter, they don't really lean into it at all. It's just really strange that
They
they're
just have a
everywhere.
faster boat than you, and they
But
get where you're going before
it's
you
a big
do.
ass dock. They're not faster
Mhm.
than you know what I mean? They're just there.
Mhm.
But it's never presented as weird, but it just stood out to me. I'm like, how is this happening? You know? And so that like this is super simplification of it, but that's the game. You're going from like pocket of islands, completing some weird fish quest, uh, to in order to get to the next pocket of islands, in order to do some more weird fish quests.
I did knock fishing a little, but I didn't mention I almost always enjoyed the description of the fish.
That's
Well,
true.
so that is where I think like while I didn't super connect with the
The
eldritch
people,
horror,
meh.
yeah,
The
the
fish,
people
excellent.
some of the things that this game does from a mood and tone setting is really good. So what you're talking about was one of my favorite things is that while you're fishing, periodically and pretty frequently, you can catch what's called an aberration. And
Yeah.
this is when I think they do when the eldritch stuff like does work for me. You know, you'll be catching like a mackerel and all of a sudden you'll catch like a mini-eyed mackerel and the little image is like this fish covered in eyeballs, or like lacerated cod and it's just like a horribly misfigured split up cod, and there's like 100 of these different aberrations, and they look weird and their descriptions are great. Like that's arguably the best part of the game.
Yeah, I agree. It was fun to catch the weird fish. You know, weird fish are good.
Yeah.
Um, Could we talk a little bit about like the overall like angle of horror that this thing has? Because this is like it feels to me like the sort of modern post Lovecraft attempt at cosmic horror, or sort of like the post Lovecraft. You know, the
Hmm.
um I just a little bit of background for me. Like I used to count myself as a major fan of this style. I was, I read a lot of Lovecraft when I was younger. I enjoyed the Call of Cthulhu role playing game when I was younger. And I've read a lot of things in this kind of world, the sort of like 1920s, electric lights and tentacles, kind of vibe, right?
Yeah.
And like so I've also done a lot of thinking about this style, and this game kind of crystallized something for me that I think has been kind of brewing in my mind for a while, which is that, this is not to say that you're wrong if you like this, but like for me, I think this style has kind of run its course. The style of horror. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about it a lot because like I think, this game is part of a sort of current wave of this style of cosmic horror that has had to reckon with its inspirations. H.P. Lovecraft was a racist. A lot of the books that he wrote contain pretty blatant racism. If you treat it as like the golden original texts of your favorite genre of writing, then you're going to have to reckon with that, right? Um, and I've had that reckoning, and I'm over H.P. Lovecraft for the most part. But there was I still had a lot of like a hangover of sort of affection for the genre, um, that has been running out of gas. And
Hmm.
a lot of it is that like I think a lot of the current approaches, this game included, to cosmic horror, as a concept. And when I say cosmic horror, I'm talking about like H.P. Lovecraft kind of pioneered a style of horror when he was writing in the 20s, that was about human beings facing horrifying things that were literally beyond their ability to comprehend. And what was really unique about his writing was that he had main characters whose mental state would deteriorate throughout the story as they were unable to sort of correlate the like bizarre otherworldly things that they were seeing or experiencing with their mental model of how the universe works. People facing the beyond and losing their shit as part of it. um and but unfortunately, through like decades and decades of people being inspired by this kind of writing and this kind of concept, that kind of horror has ultimately, in a lot of cases, boiled down to cosmic horror equals there is a tentacle here, or cosmic
Mhm.
horror equals there are fish people. The trappings of some of a minority of H.P. Lovecraft's writing, and not even the stuff that I think is worth preserving. So for me, like, I was just like, this kind of horror is out of gas for me. I don't know if you
Well,
guys have other feelings about it.
I will say that the I did not read the book Lovecraft Country, but I watched the TV series, which is what if
That was out of gas for me
Lovecraft
too, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
monsters were attacking black people in a racist town? Like what if the
Yeah,
cosmic horror was racism? And it's like what if we just took racism and added Lovecraft monsters to the racism? So like the mental state degradation of slavery and it's set in the 50s, but like what if racism was cosmic horror? So it's just like
yeah.
it's that's the kind
I
of twist
agree.
I like.
There's great
There's
stuff
cool
like that
stuff
out
to do
there.
with it, but the base just taking it and flavoring, tired. Like we do know there's a lot of folks playing in this space who are doing really cool stuff in it, but like
Yeah.
just taking it as like vibe,
Yeah. Well,
not as interesting.
it's like any
Yeah.
highly stylized effort. Like it usually has a big moment and then gets played out. The only stuff that continues to stick are things that take truly unique approaches to it, like cyberpunk, steampunk,
Totally.
zombie
I thought
stuff.
about
Like
steampunk in
uh,
particular.
you
Yeah,
know,
it's an aesthetic more
all of
than
this stuff,
a
yeah,
yeah.
and we're pretty tired of most of that, but every once in a while something comes from in that genre that you're like, this is a new look on it and this is a new twist on it. And I don't really think that Dredge does that. It is not a new lens on like a on this like Lovecraftian
Yeah.
world.
And
Eh,
like you look at their press kit, they don't say Lovecraft anywhere in
No.
it. Like
right.
they're clearly like they understand the problematic, history of
Mhm.
the genre that they're like tootling their boat around. But like
Tootling.
sorry, I'm just stealing that.
No,
I don't
no,
know that.
tootling is so good.
Um
I'm just enjoying it.
but like yeah, like I don't know, it just it does it they don't it feels like they don't have anything new to hang that on, or hang. I'm not sure
Yeah.
the right thing to say
Well,
here, but
so let's talk about how you actually see it in this game, because
yeah.
so far we've almost exclusively been talking about mechanics and gameplay,
Mhm.
and we haven't
And
really talked about
vibes.
the horror part. Yeah, about the vibes. And in a lot of ways, I liked it, but also in a lot of ways, I ended up barely interacting with it. So the core mechanic that like creates the horrible the fear of this game is that you have a panic meter. And to be completely honest, I played all of this game and I still don't fully understand how the panic meter works. So I think there's a little bit of a failing in the game, or at least my own ability to understand it. But basically, when you're out at night, you start to panic and you have this meter that increases. And as your panic meter increases, your connection with reality starts to reduce. And you can fix your panic meter by being in bright lights, sleeping, or being in daytime. And so, really early on in the game, when I didn't really know what that meant, it was legitimately scary to be out at night. Your panic meter starts going up. You start seeing stuff swirling around the boat, or there's other, you'll see like ships in the distance that aren't there. And there's a lot of different ways that this presents itself. And but ultimately, once you get back to a dock, you're able to rest and it all goes away. There was a moment that like this did really click for me that I really liked. Later in the game, there's this like sort of mangrove area, really small islands with a lot of trees and vines and stuff. and my panic meter was really, really high, and I was trying to get back to the dock, and vines were coming out of the water and blocking my exit. So I ended up having to take this really circuitous route to get back to the dock, navigating really narrow spaces. Your boat does have health, and you can sink and die, and you have to load from your last save, which can be lost progress. And so, like, these vines coming out of the water, outstretching themselves and blocking exits, like that felt like a real moment of panic and a real, like, sort of existential terror. Um, but for the most part, it was like, it's night, so I go back into the bay and I'm fine, you know?
So I loved the panic meter, not because I love panicking or stress, but because it's an eyeball.
Yeah, yeah,
It
it's this
looks
big
so
eyeball.
cool. It's closed, it opens, it jitters around, like, that is, to me, the kind of UI touch I like in a game. Like,
Oh
do
yeah.
something weird with your panic meter, please. Don't just make it a glowing stress ball. Also, like, strange things happen to your screen. Like, all the visual things around the panic meter made me very happy, which was a funny reaction to have to being at terrible risk of losing my sanity. But, like, I
Yeah.
was just delighted by the panic meter, and it almost, again, in the "Ooh, this is so cool. Oh, no, I'm supposed to be scared."
Yeah.
Whoops.
It was good UI. I have a question for you guys because this never happened to me. Like, occasionally my character would be, I guess, freaking out, or I'd have my panic meter pretty high. But usually, I don't think I ever like lost or had to restart due to it. It was always just like, there's more risk of knocking into an unseen rock that comes out of nowhere or things like that. Is this
Uh,
something where like you don't game
no,
over just from the panic meter,
I don't
right?
believe so, because by the end of the game, it almost as an experiment too, just to see, I stayed awake for multiple days
Oh,
while
no,
fishing.
Nate.
And honestly, it's part of this is part of the thing that left me a little wanting of this game, was that I was kind of hoping shit would just totally pop off, like, it's the big fear of this game is, if your panic meter is high, you need to get to sleep. That's everybody. If you've been awake for a long time and you go into a dock, whatever NPC you talk to is gonna be like, "Oh, hey, buddy, like, you're looking a little rough." Like, it's built into the game for them to imply for you to go to bed. But, like, for the most part, especially later in the game, when there's magic powers and stuff too, which, we can talk about or not. But, like, you end up being pretty strong, and, like, yeah, sometimes things are bumping into you, but I don't know, I was able to avoid most of it once I understood what was happening. And even at full panic for multiple days, I was like, I'm just gonna keep fishing. That's
I
fine.
also
Yeah.
thought weird consequences were gonna happen if I didn't deal with the infections in my fish, cargo. If I let
Yeah.
infections run their course, I thought something really cool was gonna happen, and I just ended up with a bunch of
The
terrible
bunch of
fish.
rotted fish. Yeah. I mean, that's one of
Yeah.
the consequences of being out at night with a high panic meter, is that something slithers its way into your dock and it spoils or into your boat, and it spoils all your fish, which is a cool touch. Like, it's a good risk
Mhm.
from the gameplay. Like, I could lose a day's worth of fish if I don't, like, deal with this. But you do get to a point, as Laura was saying before, like, there are alternative methods to acquiring fish, the crab pots and the trawl net, which basically act as like a passive fish income.
Mhm.
Made it where I was mostly fishing for purpose. Like, I need this shark, so I'm gonna go find this shark. And I was making money through like, just through the passive fishing, the trawl nets and uh, the crab pots and whatnot.
Mhm.
But, like, the overall design of these islands, the like the way the world looks, and the perceived fear of like the night and the panic meter, is where I do think this game is really good. It just doesn't go very deep. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I was saying. This game is like a mile wide and an inch deep, because I wish there was more. I wish it went, like, totally insane if you actually stayed up, like, super late.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
proportions of the game were not what I expected them to be. It's a lot more cozy fishing game than
Cozy is not the
well,
word I would use,
cozy
but
is a
yeah.
question, but like, fishing game with a repeatable mechanic
Hmm.
Yeah.
um than like real strange stuff happening.
Yeah, I think with a different coat of paint, this could be a cozy game.
Well, it has a
100%. Yeah.
it has a passive mode where you can basically turn off all the spooky and just go and
Mm,
fish. It's in the settings. And
funny.
yeah, it does make me think like I'm wondering, do they like do these developers, because there's a lot of awesome stuff in this game. And so I'm wondering like what do you take from this game for like a Dredge 2? Is it the spooky scaries? Is it like Dredge 2 leans even more into the Cthulhian nightmare element of it? Or do you say, we kind of have a pretty good core fishing game here. Let's take that and put a whole new coat of paint on it and make just like a totally
Agatha Christie's Seaside Mysteries, where you go find
yeah,
evidence
yeah.
to solve little cozy murders at a nice Art Deco hotel. Like,
Yeah. Who killed
the
my
thing is, it
fish?
could work. Like,
It
it's
could
the
work.
same mechanic works for
Yeah.
both,
Yeah.
which is
The-
wild.
mhm.
Um,
Another thing I really liked about this game, which I do think added to the overall atmosphere, and even though I said I did try to engage in things like podcasts during this game, I did want to call out that I think the sound design is really good and the music is really good. All the sounds of the fishing sound really, really nice, and the sounds of the ocean and just like the atmosphere of being out on the boat. There's some really cool stuff with how they make it a little surreal at different times. You have a foghorn on your boat that you can blast and it can echo. And if you're panicked enough, like what happens after you uh, foghorn can be really strange. And there's just like lots of little good details in the sound design, and the music is really nice too. So I think like this game is a full game. You know what I mean? Like we cover a lot of games here that like really they prioritize one aspect of it and maybe let something else slide. While we don't necessarily love everything about this game, like it's an impressively put together full indie game that I'm not surprised is getting so much press and attention, because this is like a really complete game. Just whether it sticks for you or not is going to be really dependent on a couple of things, namely whether you like the fishing
mhm.
and or if you um like the tone of it all.
So I think that's about all the time we have. We are going to do a spoiler break on this one because there's some weird and creepy surprises in the latter part of this game. Stuff that I am not spoiled on. So Laura and Nate will be telling me about what all I missed out on. So if you're interested in that, stick around after the outro for our spoiler break. But if you're hopping off here and you don't want those spoilers, thank you for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. You can find our show on the internet at shortgame.fm, which is where you'll find all the links and buttons to all of the things, including a link to our Patreon. Thank you so much to our patrons. We really appreciate your support, and we've actually just recently restructured our Patreon just a little. So, at anyone who supports our show at the $3 a month or higher level, that is all of our patrons. We've recently eliminated our $1 tier. Thank you to all of our patrons who are at that tier. By the way, if you're first hearing about it here, the $1 tier has gone away for new patrons. If you're already at that tier, nothing about your account or patronage or whatever you will be disrupted. If you do feel like jumping up to a higher tier, we certainly will appreciate you. But if you are already on our $1 tier that we've had since, I don't know, 5 years ago or when we restarted the Patreon, that's not going away. Thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate you. But for new patrons, for $3 a month, you can get access to our Discord, which is the community where we talk about the show. We plan episodes there. We talk about the games that we're playing. We talk about games that we're playing that are not short games. For example, we've been talking a lot about Baldur's Gate 3 over the last little while. I've been spending too much
Which
time
I
on
have
that one.
started.
Oh man, I have a lot to
Woo!
talk to you about.
Yeah.
So yeah, hey, listeners, if you want to come talk to us about Baldur's Gate 3, I'd love to talk about that right now too.
I'm smelling a
And
Patreon episode on Baldur's Gate
It's
3
gonna
coming
happen,
real
I'm
and I
smelling a
will
soon.
not be
patrons
on
only
it.
episode about Baldur's Gate 3 as well. That's definitely brewing. Um, Nate, when you get a little farther, let's chat. We'll record it for the
Yeah.
patrons.
Yeah.
That's a thing. You can also find all of our other links on shortgame.fm, links to our Mastodon profile, links to our profiles on other social media. Everything is there on shortgame.fm. You can find me on the internet as well. This section of the show has started getting so complicated with various different social media handles that I'm just going to start giving you my website, which is reagan.me, and you can find links to my Mastodon and everything else from there. So go to reagan.me in your web browser, and you'll find all of my links. Nate, where can people find you?
Quickly looking at your website, I didn't know you had. This is nice. This is nice, Reagan.
Oh,
Good little picture.
Thank you. I just did that through omg.lol. If you
Yeah.
ever want to set yourself up a little one-page website, it's a nice alternative to the like link trees and such of the world. So I guess that'll be my shout out. omg.lol is a great little like way to put something very basic on the internet. I use that for both shortgame.fm and reagan.me. I've had that up for a while now.
I wonder if anyone has Nate.me. I
Could
don't
probably
think
get
so.
something like it.
Hey, all right. Well,
yeah.
in some distant future when I sit down to do this, maybe I'll do Nate.me. But for now, you can find my links on shortgame.fm. I don't know where my digital life is going to be now. This is a tired conversation itself in and of itself, but
it is. We're in the post ability to find people on the internet.
Yeah. Nate
world
STL
now.
is my handle on everything. So if you're on a thing and you want to see if I'm on there, look for Nate STL.
And Laura, where can people find you?
Same thing with Nate. All my stuff is linked on not the short game, on just shortgame.fm. I'm also on Blue Sky, where I posted absolutely nothing, but I am enjoying. Seems like a lot of my game related shit posters have migrated to Blue Sky, so I'm like, oh, they're back. Interesting.
Yeah, I signed up over there as well. I'm not super enthusiastic about being on yet another like social media owned by Jack Dorsey or
No,
other
I'm just
billionaires.
lurking
But
there, but it seems
yeah,
like some of the people posting a lot of silly memes are back on there. So we'll see. I don't know where I'll end up, but I'm not posting anywhere, but you can find me everywhere. Laura Jane
Yeah.
Ash.
Silly memes are
All right.
back on the menu.
Thank God.
And thanks once again for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. And here it is, your spoiler break.
So
Can you
Reagan.
do like a Cthulian spooky spoiler break?
So Reagan, you know that guy you thought was leaning in the doorway, the collector?
Yeah.
It's not a doorway. It's a mirror.
It's a mirror. You're the collector,
Oh.
You're the
Reagan.
collector,
You're the
baby.
collector.
Oh, that's spooky.
That's the biggest spoiler.
So there's really not a lot of spoilers, but I did want to talk about the ending because there are a couple things that I like and a couple things I thought was like, all right. So first of all, one thing I really like about this game is you spend the whole time doing all these little fish fetch quests that we talk about, and you do eventually get to the point where you get a classic thing in video games today where it says you're now at the end. Everything after this isn't saved, so only cross this line when you're ready, right? This game has a ton of side quests and stuff, all of them not really worth it. I did a ton of them, but so I waited for quite a while before crossing that threshold. And then once you do, the end of the game is like a minute away. And so depending on only a few decisions that you made through the main story, you will do one of two things. You will either take all of the relics, get on the boat, go out to a specific spot in the sea, and throw them all into the water, and your dead wife will come out of the water, and a giant like Cthulian monster destroys Greater Marrow
And probably the world.
and probably the world. It implies that you've unleashed, a horror into the world, and I mean, it's a pretty good like Cthulian ending.
Cthulian.
Cthulian.
I don't know what the proper pronunciation of
Yeah.
that is, but it's not Cthulian. I love it.
I
Though.
think it's Cthulian.
Julian.
I'm just like a hooligan. Yeah, so
What's that owl movie? Guardians of Gahul. It's that thing.
Cthulian. It's fine. I like I don't know that there's like nothing in the game that's really leading you up. You're doing something to probably bring back a former loved one. I don't know, Laura, did you connect like at
Yeah.
all the broader story?
So I knew that I did not play as much of the side quests as you did. So I was like, I will know what the story is. That's my job on this
Yeah.
podcast. So lots of messages in the bottle. Your wife, you were the fisherman in the town before, the deadbeat they complain about. You were that
Mhm.
person. You married a woman named Julie, and you loved her so much you named her boat after her, and you did a ritual to rename your boat. And part of the ritual is you get rid of everything that has the old name of the boat on it. And Julie's like, I liked the old name of the boat, so I kept a keychain or a pocket watch or something. Like she kept something with the old name of the boat on it.
Big
So
mistake.
then cursed, right? Boat's cursed.
Mhm.
Julie did a bad boat cursed.
Mm.
Um and she really wants to join you in treasure hunting on the boat because she thinks it's cool. And you're like, no, don't do that because you're superstitious that something's wrong when she's on the boat. You don't know she
Women on a
has
boat, always cursed.
yeah, you don't know she has the old name on a keychain. This is all through letters from Julie found. And then you find this letter that's like, we raised a casket and then he turned to me and I saw the void and end. Turns out that that's a letter written after she's dead because of this game. Letters can happen after you're dead. And so you find the book that's part of this, like the death of your wife happens when you find the book, and then you're doing a ritual to bring her back. And the whole game, there's a big fish, big fish, a leviathan,
Mhm.
the official name, big fish, very minimizing, trying to stop you from doing the ritual you're on. So that fish that you see
Mhm.
is a leviathan. That's about it. Like mostly it's piecing together the story of your wife who died tragically because she thought treasure hunting was cool. You raised something from the deep, and then when the game starts, you've like lost your memories or had them taken away, and that's like you don't remember anything from your life, and no one in the town recognizes you except the weird old woman.
Yeah, there so
Yeah, I
and
didn't understand that part, but like,
I didn't fully connect, and this is just where
but you
I'm
are the old fisherman in the
y-
town, and the
and
boat was your boat.
right. I got that. I didn't really fully recognize that 100% of the messages in the bottle that you find are exactly written by your dead wife. Like
Most of them are.
I
There
was
might be there's others like artifact manifest and whatnot, but like
okay,
most of them are your
yeah.
wife stuff.
And I also didn't get the book until I realized that I'd gotten like one version of the ending, and there was something like it's pretty obvious that there's another way you can end the game.
Mm,
And so the way that my first ending was is that there's two endings. You either do the ritual and everybody dies, but your wife comes back, or you reject the collector and you go and you throw the book into the water and your boat gets eaten by the big fish.
by
And
the fish.
you've obviously like sacrificed yourself to get rid of like to end this cycle, right?
But you're with your wife now, I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I did like
Um,
Hey,
that both of
Joneses,
these are
rock on.
done like I I didn't have the book, and then I did the one where you turn them all in, and then it starts you right back there. And I was like, oh, I guess there's another ending. And I did like two
mm,
more conversations to get the book, and then went and did that one too. And I did like that. I like that as like a quality of life thing that like I
mhm.
could see both endings within like about 10 minutes of total gameplay and just be like, all right, this game is done. I've done everything. I ended up going and looking up a bunch of the side quests that I didn't do, and they all are give fish to a thing in order to get money. And I was just like, oh man, I don't really want to do that anymore. So I didn't keep doing them. But there's like a lot. It implies there's way more. There's like this crazy lighthouse that you can, if you find all these tablets and fuse the tablets, you can turn on the lighthouse. And I thought that might have some crazy impact. And it's like you get money and more stuff for your boat.
Yeah, I
There's
was
like
looking around to see if more side quests gave me more story about my wife, and I think it was just
I
the
don't think
bottles.
so.
I think it's just
Yeah,
the
I don't.
bottles.
It's
So
all just more fish for more money and more stuff for your boat.
It's all just more fish.
it's a pretty
Yeah, and that
lean story
it
overall. Like for
is.
the amount of story is akin to what like we normally play games that are a little overstuffed with stories quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this amount of story would be like a 4 to 5 hour game, and it's
It's
a
like
little bit
12.
sprinkled out. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I do wish, like, I wish that I cared about all the little. I wish there was something that compelled me more at each of these little islands besides
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
wanting to play the game. Because I did enjoy it. So,
Can I tell you
but
there's the one thing that I thought was like the best thing I saw in this entire game
Yes,
was, and I
please.
assume you guys probably ran into this too, I don't know, where you see a little boat about the size of yours tootling around in the water, and if you get close to it, you get your whole boat gets eaten by a gigantic anglerfish, where the little boat is actually its little light dangling down on its little
So, I did
little
not have
fishing
that
staff.
happen to
That's
me,
so
but
good. I haven't
I
heard
heard
of
about it.
that.
Did you see Laura? You might have ran into these though. There were shipwrecks that were actually giant crab monsters.
Yeah,
I
I did
really
run into
liked
those.
those. I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
saw one of those, Reagan, but you'd pull up next to it because you think you're going to be able to dredge it, and it's like, and giant claws come out.
Nice.
That was a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that stuff's great. Like I think I would have liked this more if there was a lot more monsters in it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe maybe that's for Dredge too, I guess. Well,
Which I think will be great, honestly.
yeah, I mean, I honestly, yeah, I kind of think this is a game that probably, I don't know if it will get a sequel. I don't know if they'll make like, the like golf version of this. Like, I don't know what they'll do next, but like, it's, I think there's a lot to this. It clearly hit a nerve with folks. I think a lot of folks played this. A lot of folks liked it. I might be the odd man out, and again, it might just be because like I've kind of like run out of gas on this style of horror or something. I don't know. It might be me. But yeah, I'm glad that we played it, and I'm glad that it's clearly worked for a lot of folks, including folks in our community. So,
Yeah,
check
and
it
I
out.
mean, obviously,
Yes.
I played all the way through it, and I really wanted to, and I had a good time with it. But there was enough in there that I wish was different. That's kind of my takeaway from it. But overall, I'm really glad we played it. I'm glad we covered it.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll leave it here. Again, listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Short Game. See you next week.